Hello and a very warm welcome to the History of Art in 2024, an introductory course for artists and others looking at Western art through a contemporary lens. This is the first of our art theory short courses from Hastings Art School, so I'm very excited to welcome you. Let's get started. So, in my view, history is a really active process. Here are some of my favourite quotes thinking about history and why we need to continually revisit it through the lens of our modern worldviews. History is the present. That's why every generation writes it anew. But what most people think of as history is its end product, myth. And I think that when we think about something like that in terms of the history of art, that's very clear. I'll talk to you a little bit later about my particular background in the history of art, but suffice to say that when I went to study history of art 15 years ago at university, lots of the things that feel kind of core to our modern day values were completely ignored. And it was very much, what do they say? Pale, stale. It was very white. It was very masculine dominant and incredibly Western. So I think it's important that we revisit what we are talking about when we talk about the history of art often. And there has been a huge influx in interesting and new contemporary takes in the history of art. So this feels like a timely course. It feels like something that I've wanted to put on for a very long time. So let's just dive straight in. So our mission with this course is to examine art history, its objects and ideas through a contemporary lens. What I mean by that is looking at it through the eyes of our modern day values, what we in 2024 deem to be important, what we can bring to the table in the canon of the history of art. I'll probably preface it with saying that by any kind of Daily Mail definition, it's probably a woke take, isn't it? I mean, we're going to look at it through the lens of racial inequality, gender inequality. We're going to look at it through queer theory, and the rise of a right-wing ideology that I see as kind of cataclysmic in our future. We are being increasingly described as a pre-war generation, and I think that it is incredibly timely to look at the art and the objects that have come before us, look at those artists and how they have dealt with political strife and difficulty in our ever-changing world. We're also a digital community, and that has huge implications for how we receive and process information. So all of those things are going to come into this course. We want to explore what it means to look at history through art now, as in today. What does it mean to be a modern viewer of art and its history? What we might learn from the past and how we can deal with art objects from the past in the light of our current political and socioeconomic landscape through our own reality structures. I would argue that we live in postmodern times, fragmentary times, in an age of hyper-individualization. And I think it's interesting to look at history of art through that lens with a knowledge that that isn't necessarily the lived experiences of the artists who were making this work. It's hard to look outside of your own reality structure. Of course it is. But we're going to have a go at attempting to do that at times, because it is not true that all these artists were coming to their creative practices in the same way that we do now. And so that is very interesting to look at. The modules that we are going to tackle during our 8 weeks together. The first week, which will be coming up in the next video, is reinterpreting classical and Renaissance art during the rise of fascist ideology. I didn't want to rehash hugely classical and Renaissance art, I am aware that that spans more than 1,000 years of art history. The reason that I have not gone into that is because there is so much literature, academia about classical and Renaissance art, and I feel like what is very interesting about what is now quite ancient art is the way that it is used for political mechanisms going forward. I suspect we are in a period where the rise of fascism is a real risk. And so I think that looking at classical and Renaissance art and how it has been used as a modality during fascist uprising previously is helpful when we consider what kind of images may come towards us in the future. So we will be looking at classical and Renaissance art, of course. We'll look at its principles. We will look at kind of major works from that period, and then how they were used during the rise of fascism over the last century, Nazism and fascism in Italy and other areas. Then we will move on to Baroque and Romanticism, but we're going to look at that through the lens of queer aesthetics. So considering how these movements have been used by queer communities, how we might reframe them in terms of thinking about modern ideas of masculinity and femininity, and playfulness. So that is quite different from Module 1. In Module 3, we'll be looking at the everyday, which is something that artists have been preoccupied with since realism and impressionism. So the everyday, class consciousness, and the birth of modernism through realism and impressionism. So there we are looking at a shift towards individual lived experience, away from the kind of epic grand narratives of the past and big history paintings, and how technology and shifting politics meant huge shifts in the art produced around that time, and what we kind of hang on to now, how our contemporary world still looks back at this era. And then we're going to look in Module 4 at symbolism and Art Nouveau, mysticism and modernity. And I think that we are now primed as an audience for this kind of art, which has been like not overlooked. I think it's been romanticized, but particularly kind of symbolism, spiritualism in art, particularly art made by women. We are a perfect audience for this. I think we are looking for certainty, and symbolism is very good at distilling those ideas. We're also open, I think, to ideas of the unknown and spiritualism in a way that previous cultures may not have been, in terms of religious hegemony and kind of, Enlightenment theory. I think we are primed and ready for thinking about the unknown in slightly different ways. So I think that's quite an interesting module to look at now. Then we are going to move on to the aesthetics of the revolution, so the impact of modernism. And I think what's very interesting is, if you are watching some of the imagery that is coming up now as we head into political turmoil, and people are kind of firming up the camps in which they sit. And as I said before, a kind of rise in hard right ideology. It's interesting to have a clear understanding of the aesthetics of revolutionary Russia, and where they are being used again today. So the impact of modernism. In Module 6, we will look at how war, so what I'm thinking of there are the two world wars, so how war shaped the art world from the expressionists to post-war trajectories. It is, I think, objectively true that the impact of those two monumental wars in our world history shaped art history, and has an impact that still still relevant today. So looking at the kind of collectivist approach of the Expressionists to post-war trajectories and all of those isms that came out in between the wars, during the war, post-war. We're going to look at all of those and why they kind of came about. In Module 7, we're going to look at postmodernism and digital cultures. I think it's really important that though slippery and complicated to grasp, it's really important that we look at postmodernism and then consider it in terms of what it means to be a digital native, what it means to consume the amount of information that we do today. Again, I think we're an audience that's absolutely primed for this, and it resonates strongly with our kind of shared reality systems. And then finally, we are going to look in Module 8 at decolonising art history. I've put post-colonial there in little, I can't remember what those are called, little air commas, because I don't think we live in a post-colonial world. I think that it is clear from what's happening in the Middle East and the Congo and other areas in the world, the Sudan, that we are still very much in a colonial world. And to describe it as post-colonial feels disingenuous. So post-colonial perspectives, thinking about how we might go about decolonising art history, an incredibly, particularly Western art history, obviously, a very curated version of events. So we're going to look at what it might mean to start the process of decolonisation in this particular area of academics, bringing in artists who are not from a Western background, but also looking at Western art through the lens of anti-racism and what it might look like to be in a post-colonial perspective. So those are quite wide-reaching modules, actually, now I come to read them out loud. So who am I? My name is Julia Kotziamani, and I'm an artist, academic, and I run Hastings Art School. I studied history of art, as I mentioned, about 15 years ago at the Courtauld Institute of Art. And as far as I know, I was their first state school student. So I don't come from a traditional art history background in lots of ways. After I finished my first degree, I worked at Sotheby's, and then I decided it would be a really good idea to go and have lots of children. So I took a break and then came back to my studies, initially doing a foundation diploma in art and design, and then my teaching qualifications, and finally my MFA in fine art at Goldsmiths. I have specialised in constructivist and Bauhaus craft techniques. So the traditional craft techniques used often by women during the constructivist and Bauhaus movements. And my own practice is centred on considering institutional violence as a visual language. I've worked in art education in institutions my whole career, and I'm dedicated to the contemporary application of historical frameworks and continued theory and debate in art, which is something that we do a lot here at the school. In 2023, I set up Hastings Art School to provide accessible art education and opportunities. We're based in an area of socioeconomic deprivation, and we are completely non-selective. We welcome everybody, whatever your background. And the aim is really to try and allow more people to access high-quality art education. So that's a tiny bit about me. You won't see me again, promise. So it's really important, I think, to consider the limitations of what we can do in a short course like this. So here I've just sort of highlighted what I think are some of the limitations. There are probably more. We're doing a pretty short course. It's more of an introduction to some of these ideas. I have already sent out a general reading list where you can, of course, dive in and get acquainted with some of those texts. Each week there will be specific texts and resources to support your learning of the particular module. But broadly, here are some of the things I think that we can't do. So, geographical and chronological scope. The course primarily focuses on Western art history, as I've mentioned, with an emphasis on European and North American traditions. That is my academic background. That's what I know. And that is what we are kind of working from. Due to time constraints, it may not extensively cover art from other regions or cultures, limiting the scope of geographical diversity. So though we will talk about art, artists and art objects that sit outside of European and North American traditions, they have not been given as much emphasis as I would like, but that is partly because we would be here forever. We would be doing a full PhD. And so that's not what we're going to do here. So selectivity of themes and movements. Given the vastness of art history, the course will necessarily prioritise certain themes, movements and artists over others. I didn't want to give you a kind of story of art version. Those are great and you should definitely engage with them. But what we're doing here is looking at the history of art in 2024. So there will be some whole centuries perhaps that we just gloss over. Not that we don't think that they exist or that they weren't important, but that they're not what we're looking at here. You should be aware that not all significant artistic periods or movements will receive equal attention. Some may only be briefly mentioned or omitted altogether. So just have that there. We don't look at an awful lot of things. Evolution of contemporary perspectives. The interpretation of art through a contemporary lens is subject to ongoing evolution and debate within the academic community. It kind of goes without saying that these things date, and I will do my best to update reading lists and to share resources that are as cutting edge as possible, but to know that as with all academics, things become problematic and opinions change. Like, these are ongoing studies, which is exciting. It's exciting to do that, but that they will become outdated. While the course aims to reflect current scholarship and perspectives, students, you should understand that interpretations may continue to evolve beyond the course's scope. And they will, and we will all be part of that. So that's exciting. Ethical and cultural sensitivity. Artworks discussed in the course may depict sensitive subject matter or cultural practices that require careful consideration and contextualization. It is no surprise that the past, our past as Western humans, is riddled with things that are hugely problematic. There are objects that we're going to look at from times where all kinds of things that we hold as core moral values are not allowed. And so there will be objects that through a contemporary lens read as racist, sexist, homophobic, colonial, wrong. And we need to respectfully consider those and put them into their own context. The course will strive to approach subtopics with sensitivity and respect for diverse cultural perspectives, but you should be mindful of potential ethical and cultural considerations in your discussion and analysis. As we go forward and you start communicating with each other, I think it is really important that you help each other navigate what is kind of the sharp end of cultural debate. People will get things wrong. And it is for us as a community, I think, to respectfully set them right. Not everybody knows the latest language, though they should. So, holding those things at the same time, it needs to be an anti-racist space. So if you see anything or hear anything that you feel is not in line with our values as a contemporary community, you need to gently put people onto the right path. and to do that with respect and sensitivity. So, interdisciplinary approach. While the course aims to incorporate insight from various disciplines, such as sociology, anthropology, and critical theory, it may not delve deeply into each disciplinary perspective. It's an art history course, and that is a separate discipline, though it is one that I have always found incredibly useful because it straddles so many different disciplines. It is an interdisciplinary subject area, and I think that's why I love it so much, and that's why it is helpful. It's also accessible because what we're dealing with usually is art. It's images. It's things that need to exist because they can't easily be put into words. So just a kind of awareness that interdisciplinary analysis is supplement to rather than a replacement for specialised study in those fields. You may have a background that means that you know a lot more about one particular area, and you're going to bring that to the table, which is really, really cool. And I think sharing our particular educational lenses and recognizing the importance that we all bring to the table in discussions and in thinking about these things is really vital. I mean, that's kind of why we do what we do here at the school, because I truly believe that everybody's perspective is valuable and brings a different way of looking at these objects and the themes behind them and the worlds in which they sit, and thinking about how we live today. So I'm really excited to have you here, and I can't wait to get started.